First thing you need to do is open up a Microsoft Word document. You can choose to use a Google Doc. Some of the functions will be a little bit different, and sometimes there's some difficulties with the headers of a paper, but essentially all those things are the same. Now I know that the student laptops also have a different version of Microsoft Word than the teacher laptops do, but essentially you should be able to figure things out. You just might have like an extra click or two that you have to do, okay? But everything should appear this way. So first thing we're going to do is we are going to double click at the very top of the paper. This will open up your header. In the header, you must have two things. You must have your last name and the page number. Do not type the number 1 for the first page, because if you type the number 1, then the number 1 will appear on every page following, and you do not want that. So you'll click on where it says page number, and then you'll make sure it says top of page and right alignment. So if you look at the tiny picture here, you'll see that it is in the upper right-hand corner. Now, I have a couple issues with mine because I have my font settings set to something different. But what you're going to do is, first off, let's make sure that we use an appropriate font. So Times New Roman, okay? So you need to type your last name and the page number you'll see there. Make sure that it's in a Times New Roman font size 12, and then you'll exit out by clicking the little X here. Some of you will have like an X up at the top, or you can just double click out of it. Okay, but the header, the stuff up here, needs to be the same font and size as the rest of the paper. So once again, make sure your font says Times New Roman 12. You're going to start with kind of like the introduction. The introduction is your first and last name. So make sure you type your first and last name. You'll hit enter. You type your teacher's name. You will notice that the M is capitalized in Mrs. There's a period after Mrs., a space after the period, which is what a lot of people forget, and then the G is capitalized. You'll hit enter again. You then put the class. This is ELA 3. You have to have that in order to get your full credit for that, but you could also put second block, you could put American Lit, any of those are also acceptable, but ELA 3 is what you need for the credit. Enter, and then you put the date. I always like to do the date that the paper or whatever is due, so 18 November, and yes, you must spell out November, you can't do the abbreviation, and then 2016. You will notice there are no commas separating any of that, and enter one last time. Finally, you will need a title. The title should be a couple of words in length. It shouldn't say anything about proposal or influence. It needs to kind of emphasize the topic of your paper. So for example, mine might be the value of reading. Something very simple like that is perfectly fine. But essentially this is where your title is going to be. Alright, so then your next thing to do is you're going to do 5 different steps. So the first one is the introduction. The second one is research questions. The third one is the description of methodology. The fourth one is the explanation of the research steps. And then you're concluding. I know there's a 6th one on your handout that I gave you, but the bibliography has to be on a separate page. So what we're going to do is we're going to highlight those things. And you see how this top arrow is kind of scooted away from that margin? We're just going to scoot this so it's all aligned on the one side. Okay. You will need a bibliography, but the bibliography goes on its own separate page. So I'll show you how to do that. Now there are 2 ways you can do what I'm about to do. You can either select all of the text, or you can hit the Command A button. It just highlights everything for you. Double check that it says Times New Roman 12. You want the 2 blue arrows facing opposite directions, and you want it to say 2.0 because that means it is double spaced. On layout, please make sure that the spacing on the before and after both say 0 pt, 0 point. Microsoft Word sometimes automatically does it at a 10 point, and even if it's blank, it's wrong. It has to say 0. Okay, and then finally make sure that your margins are set at normal, so this means that there's 1 inch on the top, bottom, left, and right of your paper. Okay, so what we're going to do is you'll see that you have bullet points you have to do. So I hit enter, but we don't want that specific number. We want a bullet point instead. Okay, so you hit enter, you delete the number, and then you insert a bullet point. Now, some of your steps will have multiple bullet points, and that is perfectly fine. Some of them only have one bullet point, and that is also acceptable. Make sure that you are using the rubric as well as the basic breakdown to help you with that. So last thing we want to do is this bibliography. We want to scoot this to the next page because it has to be on its page on its own. Now the only thing is select it and then make sure it is centered. So it should appear in the center. It's not bold, it's not underlined, nothing fancy. Okay. You'll put your sources here, and we'll go over sources again a little bit later. But you should have been using the Purdue OWL, O-W-L, that website that I gave you that you used for your influential people presentation to help you figure out how to do your citations. Okay. Now the only difficult thing is that when you start typing stuff up here, it is going to push this down. So you have to make sure that before you print, that the bibliography is listed at the very top of the page and it's not like scooted down a ton. Okay, so it needs to be listed at the top of a page. And that is your basic format for your paper. So you'll notice I've got last name and page number in the upper right, so it says green 1 there. And then if you go down here, it will say green 2. If it doesn't say green 2, you did something wrong. And then it will have your name, teacher's name, class, date, title, and then those 5 basic steps. Okay, so the bullet points are where you're going to put all that information from your handout. Now what I would suggest doing is I would make sure that you file and save it to your desktop, or if you have like an English language arts folder on your desktop, save it there. But you need to make sure that you save this. Okay. Any other questions about MLA formatting, I'll direct you to the Purdue OWL. If I've answered it in this video, I will not verbally answer it to you. So make sure that you are paying attention. Okay. That's all you need to do for your MLA formatting.